Fallahi, and I am with the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance here in Colorado Springs. DBSA Colorado Springs offers free self-help support groups for people who are living with mood disorders. We also have support groups for family and friends, seniors, vets, young adults and teens, and women. And we're looking to expand even further out into the outer districts as well as into Pueblo. The mission of DBSA Colorado Springs is to improve the lives of people living with mood disorders. And we do that by offering free self-help support groups. It's an adjunct to medication and psychotherapy. And we believe these three, in fact, studies have shown these three together help people stay out of the hospital longer periods of time, help them get back on the road to recovery, and move forward with their lives. Bipolar disorder runs on my side of the family, pretty heavy duty. My older brother, younger brother were diagnosed. I noticed signs in our oldest son, Eric, when he was about 17, and was able to get him into a doctor, have him diagnosed, which he was, with bipolar disorder. Of course, back then, this was in the early 90s, it was called manic depression, but we know it today as BP or bipolar disorder. There were no support groups for anyone with mood disorders here in Colorado Springs at the time that he was diagnosed. And I had reached out, I don't know how I had found out, but I learned about the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance in those early years, and researched to find out if there were any groups anywhere near. And there was one small one in Denver. And I got a hold of the person who was running that, and he told me, there's a young lady who comes up from Colorado Springs to our meetings. I'll give you her name and her phone number, and you can contact her. I gave that to Eric. He called, left a message, didn't respond. A few months later, this was in June of '93, we lost him. He did die. And as I said, there was nothing in the way of support for people with mood disorders here in town. And I thought, you know, on his 26th birthday, I want to hold a meeting. It was within 3 months after he died. Hold a public meeting and have his psychiatrist and therapist come speak about manic depression, bipolar disorder. I put a little notice in the Gazette. Back then, it was free. There were about 50 people who showed up. I held this at a little community center, Otis Park. Many of you may remember that wonderful little community center. And as I said, about 50 people showed up. His doctor spoke, his therapist spoke, and afterwards, people came up and said, when are you going to do this again? We need this. The light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, I better get in touch and see if I can set up something, because there was nothing for Eric, and this is an opportunity. Sure enough, I was able to get the materials I needed to start a group, a support group here in Colorado Springs. And within 9 months after Eric died, we held our first little meeting. It was held at Otis Park. It was held on May 15th in '94. And 3 very brave people came through that door that evening. And I can remember we didn't know each other. I was nervous as all get out. I had a glass of water sitting on a stool, and then the little handbook that DBSA had sent me. And I had written down, number 1, introduce yourself. Number 2, tell them who you are. I'd never done this before, but I knew it was needed and it was important. That was the beginning of DBSA Colorado Springs. And we started holding meetings at Otis Park on Fridays. We held twice a month on a Friday. And it wasn't long before we had so many people attending that we had to split into 2 groups. This was wonderful. We also realized that family and friends were important, so we started a family and friends. As a matter of fact, it was because of a family and friends meeting that we learned about, grown children and teens, of parents who were attending that needed support. So there was a young man who was attending St. Mary's, and he wanted and was willing to set up a support group for teens. And in the process, we were able to go to St. Mary's High School, where he'd graduated, and do a presentation. It didn't bring a whole lot of people because unfortunately back then, manic depressive illness, now that we know it as bipolar, was very scary for a lot of families, and you didn't talk about it, and it was almost shame-based, unfortunately. However, we pursued. We did not let that deter us, and we started that group. It wasn't long before we had to move to Hillside Community Center because the little Otis Park Community Center was closing. And these different community centers were being closed down because of lack of funds, and we soon realized that. When in the process of moving over to Hillside, we realized that we also needed an office, someplace where we could do a lot of the work that needed to be done to be able to spread the word about our organization, to get into the hospitals. We were able to get into a small house that was across from, actually owned by Cedar Springs Hospital. And that was our first actual location. And at that time, we'd also developed our hospital visitation program, and we had an opportunity to also present to new employees at Cedar Springs, let them know who we were. And we started a little library, which was something that I felt was very important, because when I attended my first national conference in '95, I learned that Boston, the Boston chapter of DBSA, had this wonderful library, and I thought, this is important. Let's incorporate that here, because education is key. Knowledge is necessity. The more we know, the less intimidated, the less leery we are about mood disorders, brain illnesses. So we had started that very small library in this very tiny house. We learned, though, that we couldn't stay there, However, St. Francis Health Center was where Eric's psychiatrist was located and had his office. And I approached him and asked him, what about St. Francis? And he made inroads for us. They were in the process of changing over to Centura Health at the time, so we had to hold off. But eventually, we were able to get into a wonderful office, a beautiful area where we could expand our library. We were there where we could go into the inpatient units, and patients who were released or they were released is not the word. What is it called? It's anyway, they were able to come over and visit our library and learn about our support groups. By that time, we had started, I think, eventually we started a VETS group, but we had a dual diagnosis group for those with mood disorders as well as addictive behaviors, And so we were doing a lot. We began to expand into the larger community and to faith organizations, saying we're available to speak, because certainly your congregation is no doubt has folks who are living with depressive illnesses and feel that they need more than just the support of the church. We also made inroads into the schools. We developed a program, a wonderful program that we took into a number of the schools, District 11, for example, that was facilitated by a person who was well acquainted with young teens, and also facilitated a teen and young adults a teen group at that time. We have since expanded to include young adults in that category, but at that time it was for teens. It was well received. It was very effective. Our teen group grew tremendously. So over the years, just to make such a long story, but it's a wonderful story. Long story short, at this point, we are, of course, coming out of, if you will, to some extent, a pandemic. We had to shut down our in-person meetings and go to virtual meetings. We also found that we had to make a change in where we had our location and office, which, by the way, was tremendous in that we could hold all of our support group meetings, the majority of our support group meetings in this one location. But unfortunately, we had to leave since they were selling the building. Pandemic arrived, and so we had to make some major changes, and we had to cut back, which, you know, it was not unique just to DBSA, but this was happening everywhere across the board for a lot of organizations such as ours and businesses as well. However, you know, you never give up. You know that your main purpose is to serve people, to make a difference in your community. And we were able to locate an office where we happen to be right now. And we have also expanded, actually, in some way it's very good, thinking in terms of setting up our support groups, not in just one central location, but in different parts of the city, which accommodate people who happen to live in the north end of town, happen to live centrally, happen to live in the southeast part of town. And I must say that a lot of the faith organizations have been very open to receiving and hosting our support group meetings. This is a blessing because we're coming together. There's something about this that tells me that we're opening up and accepting the fact that these are true illnesses. They are true disorders that can be treated. People can get their lives back. They can move forward. One of the beauties of DBSA is that it is patient, or I could say patient directed. People who live with these illnesses actually are part of the administrative activity within the organization. The majority of people who serve on our board happen to be living with a mood disorder or are family members. They come from all walks of life. They can be professionals, which we have, and maybe housewives, or people who are just struggling on Social Security or SSDI. But they are the ones who set the direction, because who knows best than people living with mood disorders? Who knows best what they need in their lives? We are getting our lives together. We're moving forward. It's a great organization, and I am so fortunate to be part of it. You know, when I think back to when AA started, it had to have been the first grassroots self-help or self-support system that we ever had in this country. Prior to that, there really wasn't anything, but it was probably the first true support organization for people who were struggling with addiction. And I got to thinking, since that time, there have been a number of grassroots organizations, I would say in the last 15 years, that have begun to spring up all around. It's as if, you know, this is something that when people are struggling with personal issues and either a tragedy or a situation happens in their lives that changes who they are, there is something inside them that says, I want to make a difference. I can't be the only one struggling with this. And so I would say that these grassroots organizations are a new impetus towards a new sense of society building in our country. And that's where we progress, I think, into a higher level of evolution as a species, as a matter of fact. And I feel so fortunate to be among those who have taken the initiative. And it wasn't through something that just, occurred to me, but it was something that was personal and happened in my life. And I think that this is an important issue to remember when you are struggling with any kind of traumatic change in your life, to not step back and say, why me? Why not someone else? But say, why not? And take that step. I've mentioned before that in order to get anything started that is worthwhile, you've got to have no shame. And when I first started DBSA Colorado Springs, we were living in Douglas County, so I'd have to drive in. These were in the very, very early days. Drive in and stop at Office Max. There was a new Office Max on the north end of town, and check on people. I didn't have a phone line or anything, but I had a few phone numbers, and I would go into Office Max when they opened, 8:30. No one would be in the building, and I would go to the courtesy phone, and I would call people to check on those that I was concerned about. And as you know, often those of us with mood disorders don't answer our phone. And it would ring and it would ring and leave a message, but I'd always look around, make sure no one was in need of the courtesy phone. Well, one morning I was there on the phone, and all of a sudden I see this head pop out of an office, and it goes like that, and I'm looking around. Me? Yes, you. So I go into the office, and it's the office manager, I'm assuming. He reams me out for using the phone. I explain what I'm there for. Well, whatever. I left the office feeling like I'd been in the principal's office and was being reprimanded for something I did terribly wrong. I remember going home and telling my husband. Well, of course, he was livid. We buy things from there. Of course, in the beginning of any organization, you're going to put your own money in. And that's okay, because, hey, you can't take it with you, right? Do something that has purpose and meaning. So he said, I'm going to go in and talk to somebody over there. Anyway, he goes in and he explains the situation, and he's really upset. Well, within a few weeks, that office manager was no longer at Office Max. But the point is, you take any chance or any opportunity you can to further what you believe in. And if you're believing in something that is right and good for the whole, then don't worry about it. It'll all be righted. I can tell you that. I have no problem. I still go to what's now known as Office Depot. They serve us well. They're a wonderful place to go for anything that you need in the office. And so that was a little story I thought was interesting, but I sure felt like a little third grader leaving that office, I can tell you. Success stories, there are a number of them. I can recount a couple of them maybe that I'd like to share. One had to do with a young man who started coming to our support groups early in when we started, probably around 96, 97. And I remember his calling me at one point, because of course back then we were still just getting our feet wet as far as an organization was going and our support groups going. And he was in a really bad way, and I encouraged him to go to the emergency room, and I said I would meet him there, make sure that he got there. He did, and the outcome was good. A year or so later, he moved away. And of course, one gets busy with everything that still goes on with support groups and outreach that we were beginning to do, and various other activities like having parties for people attending our support group meetings. And this was important, as social activities are. And one day I heard back from this young man, and he said, "You know, you saved my life. I went on to college and got my degree. And if it weren't for DBSA, I probably wouldn't be here or have the great fortune of a good life that I have." I've seen many people come through our doors. And I remember when we'd received one of 5 or so national awards from DBSA at a conference where I was fortunate to go and accept the award. I was standing up and the award was being held up, and I saw a reflection of light, and it occurred to me, what I am seeing is the hundreds of people who have come through our doors and moved forward, reflected in that award. As of today, we've had a number of people who have stepped into leadership roles that otherwise they would never have thought they were capable of doing. We've been able to hire a part-time administrator. We have a young woman who's coming on as president this year who told me the other day that there was a time she could not even leave her bedroom. She's now speaking, she teaches, she is involved in DBSA, she's excited about her new role. There are those who have attended our support groups for several years who've decided that they want to give back, and so they move into a role as a facilitator of a support group. By that avenue, we've been able to open and have more support groups. They stay on. They serve as a facilitator. And then they see that they want to do more, and they're recruited to serve on the board of directors. And their insight is something that you can't compare with someone who just comes in saying, "Hey, I want to volunteer. I heard about it. Oh, it doesn't run in my family, but I want to be part of this." They too are welcome. The point is, this helps people get their lives back, become productive citizens in ways in their community that they were not able to in times before, to widen their groups and friends, be able to communicate with family members that they weren't able to before, to be able to explain to their family members, "This is what I'm dealing with. I need you in my life. I need you to be as maybe my coach, or to remind me, say, to take my meds, but you don't have to, I won't think of you as being intrusive, because I now know who I am thanks to DBSA. I have a purpose, a meaning, and that's what we're here for, a purpose, a meaning, and a direction in the lives of people who are living with mood disorders."